News, views, voices of the global Indian community. India abroad.
So there was a recent poll done by Harvard University. It was a youth poll. I don't know if they had broken out by the Asian American community, but all told, only 4% of voters 18 to 35 cited Gaza and or foreign policy as their number one issue going into this election. I know it's an extremely important issue for youth today overall, but I think there are other issues that are higher on the list for them: jobs, the economy, inflation, that are paramount, that I know both of the candidates, Biden and Trump, are going to be messaging on this election. But at least in the research right now, Gaza and foreign policy are just not registering. We have not had a foreign policy election in this country in a very, very long time. Even in 2008, when Obama was elected, during the war, Iraq War, it didn't register that high. It was only in the background. Yeah. So at the AAPI Victory Alliance, our main focus is to ensure turnout of the AAPI community, Asian American Pacific Islander community. And our focus is primarily in battleground states, so Nevada, Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina, etc., Pennsylvania. And our main focus is trying to determine how, on an ethnic basis, so Indian Americans, Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, and Filipino primarily, and then in the upper Midwest states, the Hmong population, the Hmong community is very pivotal, is to essentially come up with strategies that will encourage their turnout. Part of the strategy is related to in-language work, so 35% of the AAPI community overall is limited English proficient. And so these are people that maybe can read and write, but they're much more comfortable in getting their campaign information, whether digitally or newspapers, etc., in language, in their home country tongue. And so part of our strategy is to focus on that. Another part of our strategy is just specifically to focus on the youth vote, because the youth in this country, 18 to 35, are now the largest voting bloc in the country. And this is as of 2 years ago. It transitioned from baby boomers, those that were 55 plus, to the youth. And so as this community grows over time and even expands, it's going to be even more important. And how we reach youth-specific voters are going to be paramount. And the issues that they really are concerned about are things like gun violence and climate, reproductive freedoms. And so we're essentially raising funds so that we can ensure that we're reaching that segment of voters, but also to message on the issues that they care about the most. They're largely the same, and even though our communities are not monolithic, right? The AAPI community is made up of many ethnicities. That over time, you've seen that at least amongst 18 to 35, the younger voters, there is a lot more unanimity in terms of the issues that they care about and how they vote. And so you see them being largely more democratic, largely more progressive on most of the issues. There's slight variances between the ethnicities, but of course, over time now, I think most APIs are in the second and third generation. Over time, you lose your individual home country identities and you take on sort of more of an American identity. And so that's what I think is starting to play out in the research, but it's going to have its effect, of course, in the election. Well, this is really incumbent upon two things: the candidates to talk about the issues that youth really care about, right? So they have to talk about the issues, the bread and butter issues. Talk about inflation, talk about how it's been reduced over time, talk about climate and how, at least on the left, how the Biden administration and the Democratic Congress has essentially effectuated billions and billions of dollars of money that's being now funneled into the system, that's going to have an effect, short-term, medium-term, and long-term, on climate, in our country and talk about gun violence and how much this administration in particular has done on the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which was passed last year, which is probably the most comprehensive gun violence legislation passed in the last 20 plus years. So we need to get out locally. So not only does this have to happen on the candidate side, on the party side, amongst the Democratic Committee, but also amongst the groups where I work, on the outside groups. And we need to start messaging on this issue too. And I think through that cacophony of what's going on officially on the campaign side and officially on the independent side, we'll be able to break through and reach our voters. But it's also very important who the messenger is. And so that's why we're spending a lot of time and research on figuring out what's the best messenger to reach these youth voters. It's on TikTok, it's on Instagram, it's on Facebook, it's on WhatsApp, it's on WeChat, it's on gaming platforms, and that's how I think you break through and reach these voters. So the most well-known battleground states are the Upper Midwest, Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. Those are the, I believe, 8 battleground states. I am cautiously optimistic that perhaps, it's a little too early to tell, but perhaps Florida could come into play for 2 reasons. One, unpopularity of Senator Scott, unpopularity of Ron DeSantis, the fact that abortion is now on the ballot as a ballot measure, a statewide ballot measure, and also marijuana reform also. And historically, Florida has always been a 50-50 state, going back 30 years. It was only in recent memory has Florida maybe slightly pulled away, but I think it's going to pull back this election. And I think perhaps what also could come into play is the large Jewish vote that's in Florida too. If they give credit to President Biden for being an ally of Israel, perhaps that could flip some votes as well. But it's going to be very hard fought. I mean, Donald Trump believes he has that already in his corner, and having the governor of the state on his side now could sway. But I would keep an eye on Florida as an outlier, definitely in this election. We always need a little excitement as we approach election day, and maybe Florida will be that late-breaking excitement. It very much will be a factor, and we don't do a lot of work in Michigan, so I'm not as knowledgeable specifically. In general, I mean, it's obvious an impact. It's showing up in all the polling that Michigan is going to be close this year. And Michigan, prior to October 7th last year, was a state where a lot of Democrats were very optimistic about, namely because Gretchen Whitmer and her apparatus and her operation in Michigan. I still think that in the end it could prevail, but I'm also hoping that peace reigns, that there is a ceasefire, because I know a lot of people are upset for obvious reasons, for legitimate reasons. And I think the administration is certainly trying to do all that they can do. They can probably be doing more. I know they're doing as much as they can at the moment, but I really do strongly believe that we need to keep our eyes on Michigan at the end of the day. From an electoral standpoint, it's something that we need to monitor on a daily basis to figure out how we still win the state, because at the end of the day, the other side is going to be much worse on Gaza than our side, much worse. I mean, former President Trump has already talked about Muslim bans. If people don't like mass deportations, and essentially in their Project 2025, they actually have a plan in place. It's not some idea that is being talked about in the ether. There's actually hard plans, if you go to Project 2025, about mass deportations and alluding to Muslim bans. And so this is not a theory. I think we haven't heard from Donald Trump on this issue because he's been too preoccupied with his trials, honestly. I was pleased yesterday when I heard there was going to be two debates that are at least today agreed to. Whether they happen or not, I think is going to be anybody's guess. But I think if there are debates, whether or not they are debates, what you're going to see is once Trump has done this trial that he's in right now, you're going to hear much more from him. And he's his own worst enemy. He will say something that will once again reveal his true feelings, that will add on to the encyclopedia of knowledge we have already about his true feelings, about the state of the world, the state of America, and the root of all evil, of course, which is really him. And so I think once voters start to see him a little bit more in the public sphere, in the national narrative, folks will be reminded once again that not voting is, in effect, a vote for Donald Trump. I would honestly say, by any metric imaginable, the amount of legislation that's been passed, how the economy is performing, the employment rate and the unemployment rate, even cross-section against demographics, I would say by any reasonable metric, like Biden has been the most successful president since Lyndon Johnson, just by the sheer numbers of things that he's been able to pass and that he's been able to do through executive order or through his Congress. And so one would have not thought going into the 2020 election that Biden was going to govern as a progressive. But he has governed as a progressive. And even despite the odds of slim majorities in the House and the Senate, he's been able to pass legislation and get things done. And so I not only am gratified with what we have seen, but I'm very optimistic that if and when he is reelected, you will see a continuation of that and perhaps even more. Obviously dependent upon the framework of the majorities in Congress, but I really do believe he's been an extremely effective president.